Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. Reece and I, on the low-fruit sofa, are not going to be talking about some stupid creationist argument or anything like that. Rather, we're going to talk about the election, the US election, and we're going to talk about the Democratic Party going forward. And we're going to be using Sam Harris's thesis that he recently published on his podcast, on his YouTube channel, as a means for us to have a conversation, because there's some big shots swung by Harris.
And if you're thinking, who is this guy? Why is he here? Why is Steve having a chat with him? My workplace that I've been in until recently is a very deeply conservative place. It deals with a lot of military personnel. It's about 99.9% white men, and they are very conservative. So I've been a bit out of place for a while. But that means I'm in a bubble that's very different to the one that you'll get typically on Steve's channel. So
one thing I've always done, and I'm doing more and more, is trying to make sure that I'm having conversations with people that are not in my echo chamber. It's one of the reasons I'm really happy to have Ground News as one of the biggest sponsors for Rationality Rules. Genuinely love their product. They're not sponsoring this. I'm just telling you I love what they're trying to do. And with Reece, he comes at it from a very different angle from me. So quite often we'll be arguing over whether or not something is quote unquote woke. And the reason being is because of the bubbles we're in, and also the narrative that we're running with. And so we regularly have...
it's not just whether something is woke, it's what the hell woke even means.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes we get meta and start talking about, well, what even is woke, okay?
Because the different bubbles tend to describe it very differently, so yeah.
Precisely. So we're going to be using Sam Harris's podcast and his statements on especially identity politics to have a good conversation. And we want to invite all of you to tell us what you're thinking, right? Because you're in different echo chambers to us. And some of you really dislike some of the content I've put out on, say, pro-trans people and stuff like that. I want to know your views. I want to know where you think I'm not understanding things.
Well, yeah, because obviously the angle we're coming at here is two British guys talking about the American election and our perspective on it.
Listen, the right are perfectly fine with Russell Brand doing it, okay? So I'm allowed to do it from the Democratic angle. The other thing is that my entire finance for my channel is tethered to the US economy.
Yeah.
If Elon messes this up, I'm going to suffer. So, I deeply... I feel like I'm half American anyway. They'd invite me in. I'll celebrate the 4th of July with them.
Now, obviously, Trump's win and Harris's loss were determined by many factors, and I think everyone's in danger of believing that their pet issue explains everything that happened on Tuesday. Now, you could certainly make the case that it was immigration and the southern border, or it was inflation and the cost of groceries. You could even say it was the way Trump responded to that first assassination attempt, which, among other things, prompted Elon Musk to endorse him within minutes. Or it was Harris's weakness as a candidate and the way the Democratic Party coronated her, rather than allow some competitive process to happen. Or you could say that the blame lies with Biden himself and his disastrous decision to run for a second term. That was pure hubris.
So in his podcast, which you can see linked down below, Sam rightfully points out that there are a myriad of factors that contributed to the pretty big loss for the Democratic Party and a very big win for Donald Trump and the Republicans.
Yeah, and obviously those factors, some of them are within their control.
Yep.
And some of them are outside of their control. So they can't do anything about an assassination attempt, which surviving that generally looks good for the survivor.
Especially if you're trying to get yourself ingratiated in the manosphere.
Yeah.
And it's cool as, absolutely cool.
But then you've got things like running Biden for a second time, which...
Catastrophic,
It doesn't matter. All of this stuff about him having dementia or not doesn't actually matter.
Yep.
It's the way he's presented and the way he looks when he talks.
Yeah.
Whether he has dementia, doesn't matter. He looks confused.
The optics is there. And obviously things
the fact that
worse.
Is a question.
Pulled out. I mean, there's one of the things. He should have pulled out a long time ago.
He shouldn't have been running
for a second term. And the fact that he did, how many people in the Democratic Party knew about it, right? And, how responsible are they for not being able to go, let's stop trying to pretend otherwise.
Yeah.
He is on a decline.
And then you've got other things where, following on from COVID and all the things that happened, you've got inflation and rising living cost and everything else.
Immigration, the southern border. There's a great many factors.
Yeah, so there's a lot involved, but
Yeah.
how do you pick out what the biggest thing is?
Well, this is the thing. Like Sam says at the beginning, like there are lots of reasons. It's very complex. So far, I agree.
Well on board.
That's true. But then, despite him saying that you shouldn't focus on a specific hobby horse, that is precisely what he does in this episode. And that hobby horse, by the way, is identity politics, which he says is dead, and it's up to us now to bury it. And I do think that there's a lot to be said, as we're going to explore, where he's correct. But there's a lot where he seems, at least by my lights, to be very much overreaching.
But their real failure, in my view, was to not pivot to the political center in a way that most people found credible.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. There was very much this perception that the Democratic Party is one of the elites now, all the college educated, and not that of the working class.
And the data actually showed that those that voted in favor of the Democrats were overwhelmingly college educated, whereas the working class, those that are not college educated, they actually went more and more towards Trump.
I frequently saw the sort of sentiment that they're talking about issues that you can only really bother with when you're safe and secure.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Where, you've got the money to worry about these things.
Which is where the memes come from, of like, if your biggest concern is, say, trans issues, you don't have problems. That's like where that meme and where that mentality is coming from, I think. So far then, so good. I agree, at least, that the Democrats should have shifted more towards the center, tried to win the majority, but they didn't.
So to return to my hobby horse, I think there are some lessons that the Democrats really must absorb from what is undeniably a total political defeat. They simply have to recognize that several planks of their platform are thoroughly rotten. Identity politics is over. No one wants it. Latinos and blacks don't even want it, as witnessed by the fact that they moved to Trump in record numbers. Trump got a majority of Latino men nationwide, and in some counties he got a majority of Latino men and women, even after everything he has said about immigrants from Latin America over the years, how they're, quote, poisoning the blood of our people, which is right out of Mein Kampf. A comedian calls Puerto Rico a pile of garbage at a Trump rally, and the entire Democratic machine and all of liberal media seize upon it like a nuclear bomb has just vaporized an American city, and no one cared. Identity politics is dead, and we have to bury it.
Do you know what's interesting there?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even really aware of those last parts. As ingrained as I am on the internet, I didn't know.
You didn't know about the comedian saying that Puerto Rico is a...
No. And that shows you how it doesn't spread very clearly.
Yeah.
Among those circles. No one's talking about that.
The thing is that the as Sam said, the Democratic machine was like, we've got him. That's it. That's a terrible thing that's just been said. And in terms of identity politics, you couldn't have a better...
But it works on the people that are already in agreement with you. If you try and tell people that, the guy you're going to vote for is racist, they're just like, oh, fuck off.
Well, if
you've been hearing that for 4 years, or even in this case, like fucking going on 12 now.
The thing is like stuff like this does actually resonate with me, right? If you show me that in a rally you had like this comedian saying that an entire freaking country is a shit tip, and then you have it so that Donald Trump is saying that these people are poisoning the blood of a nation, like. This stuff's horrible.
Yeah,
but...
no, I agree. But what I'm trying to sort of say is we've had for a very long time now, as part of this identity politics, is the terms like racist, phobic, and all the rest of it just being thrown out every time.
Yes.
People are on eggshells. You can't walk about without risk of someone going,
phobia.
You can't have said that.
Yeah.
And so you've created a thing where you kind of dampened the word. When someone's been called a fascist for the 200th time, it kind of loses all meaning.
Agreed.
And I think that's kind of what's happened there, and why I didn't even hear about those things, because just no one cares. As Sam rightly said, no one cares anymore.
I mean, another compounding factor here is that. So you're right. I think it is true to say that no one cares, and like you couldn't have had a better quote unquote better situation happen in favor of those that think that identity politics is going to work. You had that happen at a rally. You had Trump with his rhetoric. You had him lying about like immigrants eating the cats and dogs.
Yeah.
You had viral content going around taking the mick out of him saying that. And Latinos voted more for him than they ever had. Blacks reduced by, I think it was like 10%, their support for the Democrats, shifting towards the Republican Party. If this isn't an indictment of putting identity politics as your main thing,
So I think an element of that is also down to when you're constantly telling a group of people, right, your time in our country is bad because everyone around you's racist, everyone around you's sexist, you are oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly an inspiring message to be putting out there, is it, all the time? It doesn't convince, the majority of your country to just constantly be told it's shit. And what Trump's offered in comparison to that is make America great again. Say what you will about the messaging, it is more inspiring than...
Oh, of course it's more inspiring, absolutely. And especially for certain demographics, as you said, like...
And it also feels more encompassing of everyone rather than highlighting issues between different groups. Make America great again, make the country great again.
Yes.
Not, these people are disadvantaged in this way, these people are disadvantaged in this way, these are disadvantaged in this way. Always focusing on these negatives. As true as those negatives may be,
yeah,
it's not great messaging.
Well, this is something that I have long, and we have long spoken about in terms of how do you get a message across is the language you use and the approach you use is absolutely vital, right? So if you're looking at a situation, you go, look, a certain demographic over here is underserved.
Yeah.
And needs help. You could either just focus on the characteristic that they tend to have, or some of the characteristics that they tend to have, such as race. But in doing that, you're just dividing things, and you're putting more emphasis on identity politics. You're making it so there's a division being driven.
People care more that there's a gap
and normally
between
the
working
narrative
class.
that you're expressing is a negative one, not just for everyone who isn't that minority group, but for the minority group themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, look, in the US, we care about this American dream, this opportunity. What can we do to, balance some of the instability and lack of opportunity that we're having? It's a fundamentally different message, and it's about making the US better.
Intersectionality, being as big and prominent as it became, was a mistake. And it doesn't matter how true it is, because unfortunately, the reality is facts matter less to people than a narrative.
Absolutely. So that's the case.
What you need is a narrative on how we can fix these problems, not that these problems exist.
And talking of identity politics and the narratives that are spun, right? Here is the thing that really blows my mind. People that are hyper aware of these things, that are woke in the original sense, they're aware of it. What they would do is they would recognize that telling young black men that you are inherently violent is extremely messed up. It's extremely wrong, and it's something you absolutely should not be doing. Telling Latino men that you are inherently lazy is a disgusting, repulsive thing to say. You shouldn't do it.
Yep.
And yet somehow these people became utterly okay with telling, say, young white men,
you're inherently racist.
You're inherently oppressive.
Yeah.
And they didn't recognize that there's a big issue here.
Well, they've done the thing that they've said you're not allowed to do.
Precisely. When I speak to people that say these kinds of things, for instance, they speak very nastily about men. And I'm just like, what are you doing? What's going on here? They've reframed and redefined things so that if I was to say to them, what you're doing there is actually racist and it is actually sexist, they've redefined the words so that you can't apply it to the majority. You can only apply it to the minority.
They do, power and privilege?
Yes. And so, like, all of this is identity politics, and all of this is something that Sam Harris is saying is dead, and we now have to bury it. And I have to say that I am sympathetic to that, and I think it probably is true.
I think what you need to do is the biggest problem facing all of us, really, I would say, is the wealth disparity between the rich and the poor.
And that is what they should have focused on.
And if they had focused on the state of the working class in general and grouped us all as, the struggling class, as opposed to how everyone is struggling in an intersectional way, intersectionality, unfortunately, is divisive.
Yes, it is.
It's grouping people into ever smaller categories, and you're not going to unite people on that. And I think it's, like I say, it's a message that doesn't serve well when you want to get people voting for you.
No. And so Sam's first point here, that in terms of running on identity politics, it really couldn't have been better set up in your favour, and yet you failed with the very demographics that should have overwhelmingly voted for the Democratic Party. That is a statement and a half. And so, at least on that front, personally, I think he's absolutely correct in that assessment.
I think it's dead. That's not to say the issues aren't real.
No.
But it's dead in the sense that it doesn't win you votes.
It doesn't win you votes, and especially when you're trying to convey this stuff to like the average person who does vote. People have this idea in their head that the average person who goes and votes, like all 160 million or however many it was, 140 million, they all went there and they care about these things and they talk about it. They don't, man. They just don't. Not like their vote, it can be decided by simply seeing a meme or an advert, such as Trump's advert that said, "She's for they, them, I'm for you."
Yeah.
It's that simple. Like it can come down to such simple things like that. Or let's face it, what I think actually is, the real thing here, it's my cereals went up 40%. My mortgage is getting damn expensive.
Say the wealth
my
disparity.
wages. Yeah.
It doesn't matter because everyone's pointing out the nation's doing really well. Our GDP's up.
I know.
No one cares if they're not feeling that increase in the money.
And what's the irony? They've put 2 billionaires in charge of the economy, in charge of their lives, apparently to make their lives better now, who have had failed businesses, who have a track record of essentially violating human rights with like the way that they went around firing people and doing things like that.
The party of law and order's put a criminal in charge.
I know. Like, it's a catastrophe, and it's a catastrophe that is at least in part owned by the Democratic Party.
There's one species of identity politic that had an enormous effect on this election, and most Democrats don't seem to realize it. Around 0.5% of American adults identify as transgender or non-binary. That's 1 in 200 people. And yet the activism around this identity has deranged our politics for as long as Trump has been in politics.
Again, I find myself in agreement with Harris here. I do think that the obsession on the identity politics of trans people it has been very bad. Like when you're trying to convince average people, you could go there and talk about the economy and talk about like things that they see and experience in their daily life. You could go on that front and have relative success. Tim Walz was doing this, and as was, Bernie Sanders. Or you can start campaigning and putting so much emphasis on trans identity when the average person doesn't care. They don't understand your view. They don't care to understand your view, and making it so that your entire party is revolving around this, especially with tough response to people that don't hold the line.
It's not revolving around it, but diving headfirst in on one side of it, as opposed to being a little bit more. Again, people are probably not going to like me for this one in terms of saying, let's not make this the voting issue. Let's, not ignore it, but let's set it aside for the moment.
But we do this on all sorts of topics, right? So suppose that we care about male suicide, right? Topic that I think's really important. I think a lot of people would think is really important. Don't making that like the main thing you care about could have optic problems. For instance, it could look like you're trying to put men as your thing that you're caring about the most, which is good for the men, but it may not be good for everyone else.
Yeah.
Rather, try bringing into power a party that's going to care about societal issues like that, and you're going to benefit men that, need that help.
And unfortunately, the reality is at the moment, as I think, as you said, most people don't understand this trans stuff. They don't care to understand the trans stuff. And all you get as a result is just memes and memes and memes online making fun of them.
Yeah.
And so you got an uphill battle to win people over on this. So making it a significant part of the Democratic Party's identity. Big mistake.
One lesson I would be quick to draw from this election is that Americans aren't really into seeing biological men punch women in the face at the Olympics. And if that sounds like transphobia to you, you're the problem.
I'm very sort of mixed on what he said there. Yes, the whole label and dismiss thing is a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you can almost see the way he expressed things there. Biological men punching women. It's like, you've also missed the point.
Yeah, you're also falling for this.
The narrative sort of aspect of it.
Like, the way that Sam could have phrased that is he could have said, look, if people have an issue with, you know what, I think actually women's sports were designed to bar out what is male advantage. And so, if you've experienced male puberty, you probably shouldn't be in those leagues at all. You see, like, the framing of that's completely
Even if
different.
he had just said people having concerns over women's sports being labelled as transphobic.
Yeah.
That would have got the point across without being
the
transphobic.
loaded, without the loaded elements, indeed. No, I agree with you there. But he is right in the sense that this is how most people see it, right?
Yeah.
When I talk to people that are not politically involved and they are more and more leaning towards quote unquote right wing, I know people seem to get upset with me when I mention left wing or right wing. There's always people in the audience going, actually, left wing is, where I'm at. Anyone not quite where I'm at, they're not there. And you get it on all fronts. Look, left wing, right wing, who cares? It's just in the US, you've got two parties. So you've got your left and you've got your right. That's it. Whereas in the UK, all of our parties would count as incredibly left wing compared to even the Democrats.
So what I wanted to add on to that is very much that this links back to what I was saying earlier about when you hear the phrase transphobic for the 200th time, again, it loses impact. You don't care anymore. There's loads of people in my workplace that they don't get the trans stuff at all. I've ended up having arguments and stuff with them. The worst thing I could have done in any of those sort of arguments is call them transphobic.
Definitely.
They would just immediately switch off and stop listening.
Mm-hmm.
So just when you're trying to make a point, labeling the person who disagrees with you as a bigot, you're never going to win. You've lost, frankly.
And also, if you label them, you are actually not interacting with them in a way that's going to be in any way convincing to anyone, including people that are paying attention to the exchange. Now,
so
true, sometimes you'll get cases where you'll do that, and fair enough. Some people just are like straight up transphobic. I get it. But the vast majority of people, they're not.
But I think this is where Sam's right on what he said there, in the sense of when you label people, you've kind of locked them out of listening to you.
Yes. And that is a problem. There is room for rational disagreement when it comes to what constitutes fairness in sports.
Political equality, which we should want for everyone, does not mean that trans women are women. Trans women are people and should have all the political freedom of people. But to say that they are women, and that making any distinction between them and biological women for any purpose is a thought crime and an act of bigotry, that is the precept of a new religion. And it's a religion that most Americans want nothing to do with.
Again, like hyper mixed on what he's saying here, in sense of, I also don't really consider the trans discussion a political discussion. I consider it more of a language and what's the right word? Not a biological, but
do you mean like a linguistic?
We even say metaphysical discussion.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah.
It's understanding what the reality of something is.
I mean, like, wouldn't that apply to, like, say when they were debating about slavery or they were debating about like racism? Couldn't the same thing be said there, that it's a semantic issue?
Not really. The definition of slavery is pretty clear cut all the way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like, see, a lot of these debates and a lot of the changes that we have in the way that we look at things, especially when there's big social change, is that there is a redefining of words. Like, I don't think it's too wrong to say that the definition of what a woman is had actually been changed in order to give them the rights that men have, in order to make it so that there is equality, because inherent in the definition for how it's been used for a really long time is a subordinate structure. That's what was going on. Remember, Eve was made from Adam, made to serve Adam, and that's been the rubric that's been used throughout Western civilization for such a long time, and justified, the man being, man of the house, like in control.
Maybe I'm wrong to say it's not a political issue. Obviously, everything has sort of political ties to things. But what I mean is, it's not the main focus of what people are trying to understand about it. It's not the thing that's at the front of people's minds when they're debating this sort of thing. And I think the problem we've really got with the trans thing is you've got a group of people, they're not interested, and then you've got a group of people that don't want to let you have the discussion.
Yeah.
So a group that doesn't want to hear it and a group that doesn't want to talk about it.
Yep.
How are you ever going to resolve anything here?
But if you try and do any kind of, if you try and have any kind of resolution,
one calls you woke and the other side calls you transphobic.
The other calls you transphobic, exactly. Yeah. And you'll get cancelled on both sides, like I've been. That's true.
And so when we, how many times we've sat down, we've tried to rework how we define this thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing it, thankfully, in a way that, I don't want to say intellectually, but I'm going to be a bit pretentious and suggest that. Because when you see all these videos that the right upload, because it's all across Facebook, and they're going, how do you define a woman? And they've found the person that just sat and goes, a woman is someone who's a woman. You haven't said anything. And then you get they're just, the meme across the right is that, everyone's confused. They can't even define what a woman is. They don't know what a human being is. They don't know this. That looks more normal to most people than, a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. I'd say 90% of people there, if you do that, you've lost them. They're confused. They don't know what you mean. You've used language in a way to not communicate. And so the political angle of it is essentially you're trying to force people into a worldview without talking to them.
Which is why I think Sam is using a comparison here to religion, which is a very frequent one that's brought up on this, right?
Yes.
I personally, maybe it's for semantic reasons, but I don't think religion works as
what he's trying to do is essentially say that people are operating on this sort of de facto blasphemy law. You're not allowed to talk about this subject.
Which, if the idea is that you can't talk about it, that's in religion, but it's not religious. Like you'll find that in try speak out against the Communist Party in China.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? It's not
that doesn't mean communism is a religion.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just you're not allowed, and in that sense, and it's a really big problem, right? It's very hard to be able to have a conversation there. And one of the things that I've emphasized in my conversations is there is really obviously to me, room for rational disagreement. And that is something that's not been allowed on both sides, by the way. Like it's absolute lunacy, this whole topic. It's so destructive.
But the thing is as I said about my workplace, very conservative, 99% white men, they've taken the mick out of the whole non-binary thing.
Yes.
And they'll say, they, them, that's a plural. And then you sit there and go, well, is it? Because historically it's been used in a situation where, say you've only got the name of a person, but you don't know what gender they are. They, them then gets used singularly for that person.
I know, and these come from the same people that like, they get upset if you don't refer to a ship as a she. I'm like, come on, man. Like,
but when I point out to them, like, if I tell you that there's someone's next door, their name is Leslie, what do you know about them? What I've just done there, what do you know about them?
Them, I don't know.
That is perfectly fine to say.
One of the rejoinders you'll get from people is that it's a filler. There is a right answer, but there's a filler. But then what they're doing is they're shifting the dialectic from being about language to being about, the facts of the matter. And it's like, well, if you were talking about language, then actually, no, that doesn't remedy that.
But
you are using
they,
them.
Is rather than saying that they're being transphobic or bigoted or anything, I just talked that through. All of them got it immediately. They understood that, they, them can be used in a singular. Then, of course, they move to, but people can't be between genders. But you move the conversation forward of that as well, and you highlight, right, but what is a gender?
But you did it wrong. You were meant to just call them transphobic and bigoted, and then be upset that they didn't in any way,
But obviously, it's only anecdotal. But I think I made more ground with people.
Yeah.
By just talking to them like friends, essentially.
Yeah.
Having a discussion and a disagreement.
And I've had this. I've had the same kinds of conversations. Like, people have said to me, like, well, how do you define a woman? And then I'll give them a definition. I'll be like, that's too much long of a definition. I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't realise there's a rule that has to be short.
Definition shit.
And then after they define a woman as an adult human female, I'd go, what's an adult?
Yep.
And then normally what unfortunately happens is they go, stop playing language games. I'm like, bro, you brought up language games. And it's like, we're going back to Socrates walking around Athens going, what's pious? What's pious? And then everyone going, oh my goodness, I can't define.
Again, it's the same thing in my workplace. I ended up saying, what's a female? And they went, XX chromosomes. Okay, what about someone who's XXY?
Yeah.
What about XXYY?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have an answer.
What about someone that's got XY but has a vagina?
Yeah,
has breasts?
I brought up androgen and sensitivity, and each time they were like, oh, I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Are they truly bigoted, or are they just lacking information?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think never attribute to malice what can be attributed to ignorance is the sort of sentiment that we need to be adopting.
That should be across the board, and it should be like a token of generosity that everyone extends to everyone.
But I feel like social media has kind of done that the other way. It's made us more ignorant while making us assume the worst of the other people.
On the religion rhetoric, don't think I think he's pushing it too far. Whereas I think if you take the fundamental thing he's getting at, and that is that dogmatic, you must have our views, we're going to cancel you. That's fair.
The funniest bit is I think I can actually agree with him to a degree. Because not only have you got the dogmatic aspect, you could argue that there are people that just take this on faith. It is the line of what is repeated from everyone else around them. They have no reason to follow it other than the people around them do.
Yeah, that is true. I can understand that happening. I mean,
obviously there's no worship involved, if you want to go that angle, but the element of sort of taking a definition on faith, if you will, without thinking it through.
I know people who haven't been touched by this issue personally, for whom it was the only issue that decided their vote. In fact, it is the issue that fully radicalized Elon, right? And he's spoken about this at length.
I mean, Elon's a pretty poor example for that, isn't he? His daughter is trans.
People that are not interested voted on this. In fact, Elon. It's like, no, Elon's really, really
He's
invested.
actually very invested.
His daughter, I think it's Vivian.
Vivian, yeah.
He's explicitly stated that
he said, my son is dead.
My son is dead. Which there's a way that's like, I can understand what he's trying to say there, but he's not saying it in the way that you're trying to.
Well, he's not saying I've lost a son and gained a daughter.
No,
he's just saying my son is dead.
My son is dead. Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
The sentiment, or it isn't like my daughter's realised who she is or anything like that. He's very, very opposed to it.
Precisely. And then he follows that up by saying, I decided that at that point I want to end wokeness. So for him, it's a deeply personal thing. Like, he hates it, he dislikes it. So not a good example there from Sam, no. but I think he is right. There are lots of people that they're not involved in politics. But if you disturb them and you tell them they're a bigot and a transphobe because they haven't thought about something, even if they actually are, they're going to vote against you.
His point here is essentially the whole identity politics has backfired. Instead of bringing people on your side, it's radically turned them against you.
Take the term Latinx. Who was that for? Only 3% of Latinos are in favor of this silly rebranding of their ethnicity. Again, Trump did better among Latinos than any Republican in memory. Do you think it was because there wasn't enough identity politics rammed down their throats from the left? Do you think they just need to see some more white people admonished for the sin of cultural appropriation? You think another lecture about sensitive Halloween costumes might do the trick? Much of Democratic politics has become a bad SNL sketch. Democrats simply have to understand that this is one of the reasons that we're getting 4 more years of Donald Trump. 4 more years of this man holding more power and responsibility than any person on earth. If it sounds like I'm blaming far-left activists for this, along with everyone who bent the knee to them, I am. Sure, inflation didn't help, but the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party couldn't change the price of groceries. They could control whether the vice president gave a rational accounting of why she no longer supports taxpayer-funded gender reassignment surgeries for undocumented immigrants in detention.
So when Sam is saying that for him, one of the biggest factors, if not the biggest factor, is identity politics, as we've seen, he's almost exclusively focusing on trans. And fair enough.
Well, he highlighted the whole Latinx thing, and obviously we had the Womaxon thing as well.
Exactly. So, he's focusing on all identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, the trans stuff is the main thing, which, fair enough, I actually think that has taken up a lot of space in a lot of people's minds.
It's probably the most recent stuff.
Yeah. And then the Latinx, great example, right? What is it that you said? 3% of those polled say that they like it. Who's this for, right?
It's for the elite white people, ironically, colonizing the
Exactly.
Latin language.
Yeah. It's like, here's what we want to do with it.
It's a language that isn't yours. It doesn't run
Mhm.
like English. It doesn't operate. It is gendered. And you're telling them that they need to make it less gendered. And so you're trying to impose your rules on another culture, essentially.
Exactly.
And so that's why you've really lost that.
So going back to what we were seeing earlier on, this has been a perfect election for identity politics, and it failed catastrophically because you had Trump saying immigrants are poisoning the blood of the nation. He was saying, I know, it's insane, man, insane. They voted for this man. He was saying that he wants to deport something like 15 million of them. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's absurd, right? They still voted for him. He said that they're eating cats and dogs, right? At least certain demographics are. And also, the other party said that we are going to campaign trying to make it so that you have more inclusive language. And they just said no.
How annoyed do you have to be with identity politics to vote for the guy that says you poisoning our race?
Or, as you said earlier, did they just not see this stuff on their feed?
Yeah.
Did they realize that if you want the Latino community to vote for you, just keep sticking trans stuff in their face and keep pretending or even saying the truth on what the Democratic Party are wanting to do for trans people, and then that's it. That's what you got to do in order to get the vote. Whatever they did, it worked.
Yeah.
And whatever the Democrats did, didn't.
I do want to comment a little bit there on what you said about the whole cultural appropriation thing.
Mm-hmm.
I find that incredibly frustrating because I've seen things like, oh, white people can't have dreadlocks. It's a black hairstyle.
Yeah.
And it's like, right, you realise like the Norse people were wearing dreadlocks 1,000 odd years ago. So
yeah.
You've got that aspect of it. So you've got people who don't even understand that there's different cultures out here with very similar sort of things. There's an element of, if you want your country, your culture to be inclusive, you can't restrict people onto who can wear what.
Yeah, I mean,
again, how racist does that appear? You're white, so you're only allowed to wear these clothes.
Yeah.
You're of African descent, so you are actually allowed to wear these clothes.
Mm-hmm.
You're Asian, so you're allowed to wear these clothes. You're now telling people what they're allowed to have.
What they're allowed to wear,
based on their ethnicity.
I know.
No, if you want your cultural melting pot, everyone can be accepting of it. Surely.
And they again, this is where you can flip the script, and they would become immediately uncomfortable. Like, I don't know, what's a quintessentially white thing? Starbucks, right? So I've seen that in memes at least. So what if you went up to like a black person, you took it away from them and said, sorry, you're not allowed that, brother. Like, you're not allowed that at all because that's a white person
How
thing.
far do you take
what
this?
What the fuck are you doing?
Cars were invented by the Germans.
Yeah.
No one who's not German can drive a car because otherwise that's cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
How far do you take it? And so to 99% of people out there, on the face of it, it's ridiculous. And so when people are getting cancelled for their Halloween costume,
mm-hmm.
it just turns everyone against it. It just looks ridiculous. And then if that's part of your campaign messaging, those people that you've lost
mm-hmm.
are now going to be, I really hate that.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to vote for it.
Now,
so this, I think he's right in that all of these factors here that have been discussed under this sort of large umbrella term of identity politics, I think it is huge. And I do think it is probably a big, big factor at play.
So I agree.
Especially from what I've seen online.
Yes.
It is just like everywhere.
Well, the right, especially this campaign, have dominated online media, and especially men's spaces. And they've done an extremely good job of it. You know, like Trump's team saying, let's go on Lex Friedman's podcast, let's go on Joe Rogan's podcast, let's go on all of these different spaces in the manosphere. Let's you know, go to UFC again and ingratiate ourselves with Dana White, and like this stuff has been very, very effective. And it's also been effective in humanizing him, right? Like one thing that I thought was actually really good from him is sitting in front of even Joe Rogan for 3 hours, even though you're going to get like the easiest, most simple interview.
Questions.
It humanizes someone. And actually that's something that Kamala really could have done with doing. And maybe politicians can learn from this in the future. There is a drive that I've noticed where people are done with traditional politics. What they want is authenticity.
Yes.
And Trump definitely has authenticity. And it shines where other people have been terrified to say the wrong thing because they have to, you know, earn that respect and whatnot back from their communities. Whereas Trump is this very authentic person, and that's something that a lot of people... Yeah, I know. Crave. This is where I disagree, however. Despite Sam at the beginning saying, look, there are lots of reasons for why the Democrats lost and lots of reasons for why Trump won, and you really shouldn't focus on one. He does here. He is really heavily focusing on identity politics. He says identity politics is dead and we should bury it. I think that this is not a very good take. I think the very obvious factor is the economy. I mean, put it this way. There's such a thing known as the electoral long COVID. And what we've seen in Western democracies is 40 out of 54 elections seeing the incumbents lose. And the reason for this is that when you're experiencing, you know, life after COVID and your mortgage has skyrocketed and interest is really high and inflation is really high and your living standards are genuinely worse, you're going to blame whoever is in government. And it doesn't matter if Joe Biden, for instance, does a very good job of bringing the economy back, which he has, right? The way that the US is and the way that the US economy is coming back is something that we in Europe, especially in the UK, like I'd love that. That'd be amazing. But it doesn't work like that because really you compare yourself to your neighbor and you compare yourself to the world around you.
And you've also, frankly, you can sit there and say, well, the economy of the country is booming. And yeah, we're going to make things work out for you with trickle-down economics.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, all that ends up happening is you don't notice any change. It doesn't matter if the country's doing better. If you don't notice the change, you just want to flip the table. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. That is a thing that is happening.
And this is where the Democrats, I think, in hindsight, really should have focused. It is the Bernie Sanders element. They should have said, look, but we are doing very well as a nation. The problem that we're having is wealth inequality. So don't vote in billionaires that want to cut more taxes and give themselves more grants. Like that's your money. Like get your money back.
But isn't this kind of what he's saying? They were focused on identity politics and dividing people.
Yes.
And not on like the working class and uniting people.
Yeah.
So it's not that these two things are separate. They are heavily linked. It was the direction was wrong.
But I still think, like, even if they had done it right, I still think they would have. I mean, the statistics don't lie. They would have had a very high chance of losing still because of long COVID effects on this. I mean, we could put it this way, right? Suppose that Trump won the 2020 election, and all of the inflation that we saw and have seen, it would have been attributed to him. Do you really think, especially with the utter pandemonium of a campaign he's just run, that he would he would have got voted back in? He was close enough to losing anyway. Like, you're talking like the differences in, say, like Pennsylvania and like lots of the swing states. If he lost 1 million votes and she gained 1 million, even less than that, in some of them it's only like 200,000.
Though, is it? It's
No.
The Electoral College.
No, he would have lost in like Pennsylvania. He could have lost in these big places. He would have lost in Nevada if there was a sufficient switch in the demographics. And if he was in charge of the economy when it did what it's been doing with long COVID,
that's the bit I agree with, yeah.
then he would have lost. So like, this is where I'm saying that the economy is the main thing to be focusing on. It's not actually identity politics. Identity politics is dead. It needs to be buried, but it ain't the real reason.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I said, is they focused on the wrong thing. But your point was that they were probably going to lose this no matter what, surely, if you're sort of saying is that the way we've seen things going around the world at the moment is that the incumbent parties are being kicked out.
Yep.
Then there's almost an element of there wasn't a lot they could have done here.
Yeah, I think so. I think if they had corrected many of the things that Sam pointed out at the beginning, right? If Biden didn't try and run for a second time, that was pure hubris. If Kamala did a good job of separating herself from Biden, if they had a better presence online, if they focused on the economy, maybe they could have stayed in, right? But when the people think and attribute their lives getting worse to you, you will have a massive uphill battle. And so if there is one hobby horse to pin this on, to me, it is quite obviously the economy. Now, did identity politics help? Fuck no. Fuck no, it didn't help. And I think Sam is correct. It is dead, in the sense that it shouldn't be your first foot forward. That's not how you reach like people that are disengaged with politics. But yeah, my disagreement
I think the thing that the West as such needs to be focusing on at the moment is this disparity in wealth that's occurring, because it's getting wider and wider.
Yeah.
And for all of those people that sort of go, oh, capitalism, yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
You will end up with a revolution on your hands if you don't do something about it, because there's only so long you can sit at the bottom and look at everyone else lording it over you before you, like I said, you want to throw that table over.
Exactly.
And the wealth disparity is running away at the moment, and it's getting mad.
Do you think in the US with...
And AI, by the way, is going to make that worse.
Yeah, I know.
Because when these things come in, it's the working class that are hit with the issues first. The job layoffs are done at the low level first. So as much as I think AI is going to revolutionize the world, it's going to hit us hard.
No, it for sure. So you have this situation in the US where two billionaires have power. Yeah. They have demonstrated
They're about to
Trump didn't
things.
pay loads of people that he needed to pay, right? That's just a fact, by the way. You can just look it up. Elon, the way that he fired people at Twitter and fired people from Tesla, is really awful.
You see this thing about people who want to come work for me for free on an 18-hour. It's like, fuck off, billionaire.
I know. And it's like the idea that they're going to fix wealth inequality.
No, not a chance. No.
I don't know. Richard Dawkins has some faith in Elon Musk here, man. He put out a tweet going, I'm quite upset that Trump's won, but I do think that Elon is absolutely brilliant and he's going to be able to fix things. It ain't happening.
They're deregulating everything, removing taxes for companies, all of these things. It's just going to make that divide even greater.
I know. It's going to be sad, but hey,
it's what you voted for.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Indeed. All right, well, that's been our take on Sam Harris's thesis. We want to know what you think. Echoing what I said towards the beginning. So yeah, do leave us a comment. If you think we're missing something, I want to know. You want to know.
If you want to call me a racist, I don't care.
If you want to call me transphobic, but also simultaneously woke, I'm used to it by now. Just call me, but all of it. It's done.
Yeah.
Do you reckon when we publish this, the first comment or the second comment is going to be about me being either a violent transphobe or woke?
It's going to be woke.
It's going to be woke, and it's going to be woke immediately.
Actually, here's a very small thing that I kind of want to sort of touch on here, because we talked briefly about, how do we define woke?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see this wokeness and progressiveness as a different thing. And I think we need to return to the progressiveness. We want to move forward. We want to create change. We want to make things better. This idea of being woke, on the other hand, is almost just like, I want to find all the issues in the world. It's
like the awareness element of it. Yeah.
And it's like, as I said about the narrative sense, there's issues to be found, everything's a problem, versus we want to make things better. It's just the narrative on the progressive side of things is just better.
Yeah. No, I agree. That is definitely a key takeaway. They need a better narrative that's more future oriented and actually progressive, in the sense like, let's do this, like let's be the best, because America's fucking awesome.
I keep hearing about all these issues. I don't often hear about what the plan for the solution is. Mm-hmm. So that's my take on it all.
Indeed. Well, let's sign off the same way we do on Low Fruit.
Bye.
Bye.